Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Luke Carruthers, and welcome to another episode of Escaping Through the Lens, the show where it's good to have a laugh, but memes do not hide the quality of what we discuss. A good point to make, as today's films of discussion have recently had a sudden surge of praise over the past few years, that being the Star Wars prequel trilogy. By the way, if you sat indoors listening to this instead of being outside looking for Black Friday deals, wise move. I tip my hat to you. I would tip my hat, but I'm not wearing it. Just one sec. There we are, now I'm wearing a hat. I tip my hat to you. You can't see it, but it's implied. But before we get into these films, let's first go back to how they were conceptualised. So when George Lucas wrote and directed Star Wars A New Hope back in 1977, he originally didn't give it a tagline at first, simply calling it Star Wars. It still blew audiences' minds when they first saw it, seeing as it was the first time a sci-fi film had been released like this. But then comes Empire Strikes Back in 1980, which turns out to be not just a sequel, but listed as Episode 5. Lucas then reveals to his audience that 3 prequels will be made preceding the first Star Wars film, now titled Episode 4 A New Hope. Whether or not this was the idea from the beginning, or because in charge of planning Yoda was. After Return of the Jedi came out in 1983, the prequels were what every Star Wars fan was anticipated for, and they wouldn't half-wait a long time until they got them. Unlike with the original films, which released 2 or 3 years after the last, audiences wouldn't get Phantom Menace until 1999. Even as a casual fan, I can't even begin to imagine what that feeling must have been like. That's not only a lot of waiting and a lot of hype, but a lot of expectations to meet with the fans of the previous films. It wasn't just a lot of pressure to put onto Episode 1, but also the later films, Episode 2 Attack of the Clones in 2002, and Revenge of the Sith in 2005, which is probably the factor that applies to the quality of the final product. The prequels have gone down in Star Wars history very poorly. Everyone has gone on about how bad these films are for the choices they made and the expectations they didn't meet. A common theory for this is giving George Lucas too much power over the creative process, which I can sort of agree with. While the original trilogy had George Lucas's overall involvement, he didn't have complete control. He directed, wrote and produced A New Hope, but in Empire Strikes Back he was only given the role of producer and providing the story, as well as in Return of the Jedi. The directors that took the helm for those films were Irvin Kershner for Empire Strikes Back and Richard Marquand for Return of the Jedi after Steven Spielberg, David Lynch and David Cronenberg passed on the offer from Lucas. Both films share Lawrence Kasdan as the screenplay writer, but Lee Brackett from Empire Strikes Back didn't return, leaving George Lucas to fill in the role for Return of the Jedi. Point is, he was given complete control over the prequel trilogy, and having gone 22 years without directing a single Star Wars film, the theory suggests he lost his touch a little bit. However, given how I thought about the original trilogy, where the one he was most involved in, A New Hope, is my favourite, I'm inclined to disagree with how him having more control leads to worse films, but I do agree spending years away from film directing only to try and direct a whole trilogy is more than likely going to lead to something outright bad. Nevertheless, I went into these films ready to see if the weaknesses are really that terrible to warrant a bad film, or if the strengths are only made that much better compared to the rest of the experience, and this is the result. Once again, spoiler warning in case you haven't watched these films, or have only heard about them through memes, which is generally the case nowadays with these films, being honest. Let's start with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
We are greatly honored by your visit, ambassadors. Make yourselves comfortable. My master will be with you shortly.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I don't sense anything.
It's not about the mission, Master. It's something elsewhere. Elusive.
Don't center on your anxieties, Obi-Wan. Keep your concentration here and now where it belongs.
But Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future.
But not at the expense of the moment. Be mindful of the living force, young Padawan.
Yes, Master. How do you think this trade viceroy will deal with the Chancellor's demands?
These Federation types are cowards. The negotiations will be short.
The Galactic Republic is in a period of decline. The Trade Federation has been given a taxation on trade rounds and so in response have organised a blockade of battleships around the planet of Naboo. To find out what this is all about, the Republic sends 2 Jedi Knights to negotiate with the Viceroy, Newt Gunray, those being Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan apprentice, a young Obi-Wan Kenobi. But before they can learn anything, the Trade Federation, revealed to be led by the Emperor / Darth Sidious, attempt to murder them, causing them to escape to the planet below, but not before discovering their plan to invade Naboo with an army of battle droids. While there, they rescue a banished Gungan named Jar Jar Binks, who leads them to his underwater city to help them hide from the Federation. Acquiring a ship to get to the city capital, they save Naboo's queen, Amidala, and escape with her and her guards on her personal starship set to go to the planet Coruscant, but sustain battle damage from the blockade in the process. Landing on the planet Tatooine, it's up to Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to find a new hyperdrive needed to fix the ship and get Amidala safely to Coruscant by betting on a pod race featuring a young slave named Anakin Skywalker, a young boy who offers them his mother's home as shelter, and is also a boy Qui-Gon senses the Force strongly in him, believing him to be the chosen one who will bring balance to the Force. All the while, Naboo is invaded by the Trade Federation, and the Emperor's apprentice, Darth Maul, is tasked with hunting down the escaped queen. Now, all of you are probably sat listening to this thinking, that's a very good description of the plot there, Luke. And I say, thanks, but don't thank me. Thank the video I watched that explained the plot in a much easier fashion, because this film's plot is so confusing from as soon as the opening title crawl. The original films had an easier to follow premise. The Empire is evil, the rebels have to stop them. I mean, yeah, one can argue it's not a very deep and layered premise, but you know what it is? Easier to understand and knows to have fun with its story. Okay, so if it's not easy to understand, it just requires a bit more concentration, right? True, but the fact is you won't be able to concentrate because it's also really boring, which in of itself is quite the phenomenal accomplishment for the wrong reasons. I mean, it's a film series with space battles, laser swords, and lifting things with your mind. How do you mess that up? Simple. You look at this film. I don't watch a Star Wars film to see racially stereotypical aliens get given taxes. I'll talk about that more in a bit. And I don't watch a Star Wars film where what are supposedly cool Jedi Knights just sit around discussing political viewpoints. I go watch a Star Wars film for intense space battles, likeable characters, and an engaging story. Imagine if the Avengers, instead of fighting and thinking of tactical strategies to fight the villain and save the world, sat down and talked about political viewpoints and had one small fight at the end of the film. Then imagine the Avengers as people in robes who speak in monotone, and bam, you have Phantom Menace. There's also a problem with both this film's story and Attack of the Clones' story, which is actually a benefit for Revenge of the Sith's story, which I will save until I get to that film. So, if the story isn't engaging, then maybe the characters make up for it, right? Nope. Out of all the characters we have in this story, I liked 2 who are not even in the film that much. Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor in his disguise of Senator Palpatine looking to get elected as the Republic's Chancellor is brilliant. Simply because you see he's having as much fun playing the role as we the audience are having watching him. Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi is just as fun for me to watch, not just because Obi-Wan is my favourite character, but because of the distance both he and the production team went to make him look, sound and feel like young Obi-Wan throughout the whole trilogy. Listen to his voice and dialect in comparison to Alec Guinness's voice, and you can very much imagine this would be how he would sound as a younger Jedi.
Now that's a name I've not heard in a long time. A long time.
You were right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
Oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics. I have to report to the Council. Besides, someone needs to be the poster boy.
An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
So uncivilized.
Hello there.
Hello there.
Everybody else I either couldn't really care about or I just find very annoying, which is disappointing. I really wanted to like Qui-Gon Jinn. He's a cool concept as the master of Obi-Wan, and Liam Neeson really tries his hardest in this role. But he never really has a character beyond being a standard calm Jedi Knight who, despite his disagreements with the Jedi Council when they refuse to train Anakin, he never really has a character arc as nothing really goes wrong for him until, spoiler warning, he dies. Oh, and he also doesn't make sense being Obi-Wan's master when in Empire Strikes Back he said it was Yoda. Speaking of Anakin, I mean no offence to the actor Jake Lloyd, but this is the most obnoxious character I have ever seen in a Star Wars film. It feels like they were trying to go for the naive but well-meaning persona that we know Luke for in A New Hope, but his overconfidence and his wooden delivery just comes off as annoying. But my biggest problem with him comes from him being the chosen one. Now this is just a pet peeve that I have when it comes to stories, but I don't like stories about the chosen one or the being of prophecy, which in Anakin's case we discover is also a virgin birth. Yep, very subtle, George. It feels like it takes away the story's danger because you know they will somehow survive this because they're destined to save the day. When we're already in a prequel film when we know the fate of this character because, in case you forgot, this little kid is going to be Darth Vader one day.
I'm a person and my name is Anakin.
So, when you see him in danger, there's no tension because you'll know he'll miraculously escape. And how do we find out he's the chosen one? A blood test. Turns out the Force isn't just an energy field that surrounds everybody, but instead surrounds only certain people with midichlorians in their bloodstream, which not only alienates the audience from the imagination that anyone can access the Force, but the idea of a main character being the chosen one also creates a bad message to the audience. I'm looking at you, Doctor Who. Luke Skywalker was never shown to be a living prophecy, just a farmer boy on an almost desolate planet. It's only in his fight with Vader that we discover he is related to someone who has great accessibility to the Force, but it is never stated to be the reason why Luke is able to access the Force, because even before we knew Vader was his dad, he's still able to use the Force very well. Not perfectly in this point in time, but enough to establish that he doesn't need to know of his family history to use it. His skill came from his desire to do good in the universe, prove himself as a worthy Jedi Knight, and seek the good in other people, creating the message that it doesn't matter where you come from or who you are, if you put in the effort and help those around you, you'll accomplish great things all on your own and prove your worth to the world. Then with Anakin it's like, nope, you have to be born special right from the very beginning. Sorry kids! I would deduce Anakin Skywalker as the worst character in this film, but that honour goes to the infamous Jar Jar Binks.
No, Mr. Stay. Mr. called Jar Jar Binks. Mr. your humble servant.
That won't be necessary.
Oh, but it is. 'Tis demanded by the gods, it is.
This character is usually the centre of hate when it comes to discussing this film, simply because he is essentially the most on-the-nose, irritating comic relief. In short, he's the guy who screams when in danger, is clumsy, gets on everyone's nerves, and reacts to fart and poop jokes. Are you annoyed of his voice yet? Because I have a whole sling of clips that I'll spare you the pain of listening to. Not to mention his dialect comes off as quite racist, something that the film already wasn't off to a good start with the Trade Federation leader Newt Gunray. How so, you might ask?
As you know, our blockade is perfectly legal, and we'd be happy to receive the ambassadors.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are 2 of them.
There's your answer and all you need to know about that character. Like, even if George Lucas was trying to go for some kind of unique language for the Gungans, you don't know whether or not you can take them seriously with how they pronounce things. Even when you get a big dignified star like Brian Blessed to play the king of the Gungans, you still can't take him seriously with how he communicates. I won't go on too much about Jar Jar and the Gungans, as they only really amount to a lifeless CGI fight with the droids towards the end of the film, but I think Qui-Gon put it best.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
As for everyone else, Queen Amidala, who later turns out to be a decoy for her servant Padme, the real queen, Mace Windu, the rest of the Jedi Council, the rest of the Republic, and even Darth Maul, I couldn't care about. So, having said all that, is this film completely bad? No, there are good moments throughout this film, but don't take them as justification for the bad stuff, because it's not. A 20% on a GCSE paper, while not the worst thing you could have gotten, is still a massive failure. But the good qualities are worth noting. And all of this comes from the final fight of the film. Not the previously mentioned CGI fight between the Gungans and the droids, not Amidala and her soldiers taking control of Naboo back from Newt Gunray, not the zero-tension space fight where Anakin blows up a space station with no issue, but the lightsaber duel with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul, which, believe it or not, is one of the best duels in the entire series. In the previous films, lightsaber fights were only limited to 2 people tapping swords as they ran the risk of breaking the props. So in this film, and even the later ones, with sturdier built props and a bigger budget, there's more that can be done in the fight, and there is. There's jumps, flips, kicks, as well as quick and powerful swings that come from actually choreographed fights. The mere sound of the lightsabers clashing is enough to emphasise the speed these fights are able to reach. This is the speed of the fights in the original films. And this is the speed the fight in Phantom Menace reaches. And it's awesome, as well as including one of the best battle music pieces in cinema history. John Williams already knocked it out of the park with Star Wars music, with the title theme, the standard battle themes, Imperial March, etc. But Duel of the Fates is a masterpiece and perfectly suits the fight, even if I only really care about one of the three people in this battle. Okay, I think this discussion on this film has gone on long enough. Now time to conclude my thoughts before I move on to the other films. Phantom Menace is a disaster of a film, no other way to say it. Which is not just a bad sign, seeing as it's the first film in a trilogy, but also a disappointment coming after a legendary streak of films. But you know what? Maybe that's the film's quality. It's so bad you can't help but laugh at the creative choices it made, which leads to an ironic but big enjoyment. At least on your first viewing. It's like driving by a car crash site on the road and taking a glimpse to see what's happened before driving along. Disclaimer, I'm not saying it's right to laugh at people in car accidents, I'm just making a metaphor for a film about the Space House of Parliament, an invincible child with weird blood, and an alien abomination. So while I don't see myself coming back to this film, unless it's the lightsaber duel at the end, I see it as excellent riffing material to watch for laughs either with family or friends. So, we're already off to a great start, as you can no doubt tell, so let's see if Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, does any better.
Traitor.
Oh no, my friend. This is a mistake, a terrible mistake. They've gone too far. This is madness.
I thought you were the leader here, Dooku.
This had nothing to do with me, I assure you. I will petition immediately to have you set free.
Well, I hope it doesn't take too long. I have work to do.
May I ask why a Jedi Knight is all the way out here on Geonosis?
I've been tracking a bounty hunter named Jango Fett. Do you know him?
There are no bounty hunters here that I am aware of. The Geonosians don't trust them.
Well, who can blame them? But he is here, I can assure you.
It's a great pity that our paths have never crossed before, Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon always spoke very highly of you. I wish she were still alive.
It didn't. It just didn't. I'm not going to beat around the bush with this, guys. Attack of the Clones is, in my opinion, the worst Star Wars film. I just wanted to get that factor out of the way before I dive into this film. It's been 10 years since the invasion attack on Naboo, and the Galactic Republic is threatened by the separatist movement organised by former Jedi Master Count Dooku. Padme Amidala, having escaped an assassination attempt, votes to create an army to fight alongside the Jedi against the threat. To protect her, she is assigned bodyguards in the form of two Jedi Knights, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, who Obi-Wan has been training as his apprentice as it was Qui-Gon Jinn's dying request. Having stopped another assassination attempt, Obi-Wan is instructed by the Jedi Council to identify and capture the bounty hunter, whilst Anakin is to take Padme to Naboo where she will be safer. So, it's up to Obi-Wan to stop the bounty hunter, and up to Anakin to keep Padme well protected whilst trying not to fall in love with her. Again, had to watch a video to explain the plot to me because the film does such a poor job at keeping the audience's interest because it's so boring. The vast majority of this film is just people sitting and talking about conflict. You know what would be even cooler? Actually seeing that conflict happen. Phantom Menace at least only felt the most stretched out with the scenes on Tatooine, but this stretches out throughout almost the whole film. But to emphasise how unengaging not only the action but the film itself is, I have to talk about the visuals. Now I know it's unfair to judge a predated film by its CGI and special effects as it is limited by the technology of its time. But there's a fine line between putting in the bare minimum amount of effort and pushing it way too far. The original trilogy's visuals, while groundbreaking for what it did with its smaller budget, the production team knew their limits on what could be done and only tested their limits when necessary, leading to visuals that, yes, may have inevitably dated, but hold a large amount of passion behind its hand-built sets, props, and camera wizardry. The Yoda puppet was a prime example of this. He doesn't look like he's really alive, but he feels alive with a production crew doing so much with so little. And I'm not saying this to diss anyone who works in visual effects, not at all. The effort they put in deserves just as much praise for how long it takes, and on many occasions, it can prove to be revolutionary. Forrest Gump, the Blade Runner films, and even some of the Marvel films are great examples as to what can be done with CGI. The point I'm trying to make is that if you put in too many special effects, you run the risk of a vast majority of your sets looking like they're not really there, because most of the time it isn't. And I think what made it worse for me was how I chose to watch these films. In preparation for this podcast, I watched the original trilogy and prequel trilogy on my PS4 on a TV that plays at 60 frames per second as opposed to the standard 24 frames per second of film. For those of you who don't know what I'm on about, frames per second is how many pictures are captured and played back in film. If something is captured at 24 frames per second, that means the camera is physically capturing 24 separate pictures within 1 second. Playing and watching it back gives the image that we're watching something or someone move. In fact, the reason why older films look so fast and so jagged is because their cameras could only capture so many pictures in a second and so had to be played at a higher speed to look more natural and less like a PowerPoint presentation. I have a theory in that I believe because our eye's vision sees images at 60 frames per second, special effects look more convincing at a lower frame rate of 24. While it does mean we see it run less smooth than what it could be, it means that we see less of the details that give away that it's not really there. Special effects, ever since their concept, are supposed to give the illusion that something is there. That's what cinema in general has been since it was created years ago by the Lumiere brothers. A display of images shown to look like something or someone is really there, when we know it isn't. We see people and real hand-built sets at our natural frame rate because they are actually there. CGI is programmed to look like it's there, and no matter how well someone animates it, there is always going to be a detail that you will notice doesn't look natural. If we see a computer-generated effect run at a speed that matches our frame rate, we see it's right there in front of us, but it doesn't feel natural because we're able to spot the details in frames that give away the illusion. At a lower frame rate, however, we are more deceived by these effects because as much as we can't speed up our eye's frame rate, we can't naturally slow it down either. Therefore, we can't match our speed to the film. I didn't have a problem with this in the original trilogy as practical effects were used as often as animated effects, but in Attack of the Clones, where a vast majority is unnaturally lit and unfinished rendered CGI that not only sticks out like a sore thumb, but in turn makes the actors stick out like another sore thumb. What you have are two sore thumbs combining to make an overly ambitious, visually irritating experience. Phantom Menace kind of had the same problem with the Gungans, some of the landscape shots, the droids and the space battles, but still knew where to use practical effects. Not to mention, when they're used to make a set design, they can often appear as lazy. There's a scene where Obi-Wan goes to a literal 50s diner on Coruscant to speak to someone he knows about tracking down the bounty hunter. They don't even try to make it look different, it's just a 50s diner, full of different looking creatures and a waitress that's a robot. Again, compare this to something very similar in A New Hope with the cantina Luke and Obi-Wan visit to meet Han Solo and Chewbacca for the first time, where despite looking like a slightly standard bar, still has its own identity as being its own thing, from the different alien designs of Mos Eisley's hive of scum and villainy, the dark shady colours making it feel like an out-of-the-public-eye joint, and energised by the fantastic cantina song. Not just a 50s diner. That's so lazy for Star Wars. Okay, enough about the visuals, I'll move on to other topics. Now, if I can credit Attack of the Clones for one thing, it's that Obi-Wan Kenobi and Palpatine have much more screen time and are still both the better of the wooden acting that comes from this film. The main villain, Count Dooku, despite being introduced an hour into the film, I find is given much more than what Darth Maul had in Phantom Menace. Being a former Jedi turned Sith Lord, he carries a graceful pride in combat like a dignified warrior, but does feel pained over the loss of Qui-Gon Jinn and angered over Obi-Wan refusing to join his side. May you continue to rest in peace, Sir Christopher Lee. You didn't have many scenes in this film or the next one, but you sure owned the screen when you did. As for the others, still couldn't care about them, simply because, again, for a majority of the film until the final act, the Jedi Council just sit around, when they could have solved many situations from the beginning. Don't believe me? Imagine the scene where Obi-Wan is tasked with capturing the bounty hunter and Anakin tasked with protecting Padme. Only it plays out like this. Master Kenobi, you are to track down and capture the bounty hunter before he tries again to kill Senator Amidala. Skywalker, take the Senator to Naboo. She'll be safer there. You can't travel on her personal ship, so you'll have to travel as refugees. It will be done, Master Windu. By the way, which of you is going to be helping me? Oh, we're not going to do anything. What? Far too busy we are. Doing what? Sit in chairs we shall. Discussing the taxation frauds from E.T. we must. And that's more important than the safety of Amidala. Surely you can handle this matter on your own, Master Kenobi. That's the point. I couldn't. Anakin and I together couldn't capture him. I could have caught him, just wish I wasn't slowed down. What's your attitude, Anakin? Anyway, my point is it's going to take more than one of us to capture this bounty hunter before he tries to kill again, so I shouldn't do this alone. Fair point. Master Windu? Master Ki-Adi Mundi? Help Kenobi track down this bounty hunter you shall. Yes, Master. As you wish, Master. You're not coming, Master Yoda? Knowledge of the Force you have. Possess knowledge of politics, of space wizards with laser swords? You do not. I'm not brave enough for politics. Let us go, men. I can't see why I can't go. All you've done so far in this story is cut up a worm and crashed a cruiser, so stop sulking and go and guard the princess. Oh, and don't try anything foolish when you're with her. I sensed your feelings when she was near you. It's not fair. Speaking of which, that terrible impression of Anakin I just did, Anakin is even more insufferable than in Phantom Menace. You know, at least in that film, despite coming off as annoying, you couldn't completely hate him as he's just a child. You know, you can boil it down to child acting. But in this film, he's quick to anger, is mean to almost everyone around him, and despite trying to come off as feeling full of pain, he just comes off as whiny. And no greater example of this can be seen than his love story that blossoms, in massive quotes, between him and Padme. Now look, I know actors have to put a lot of trust in the writing they are given and the directors who control how they look and sound in a scene. But wow, I have no idea what kind of direction actors Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman were given by Lucas. Like, everything sounds so unlike how someone would naturally sound, and the dialogue is terrible. I think when people overlook these problems when trying to praise these films, I think sometimes they forget how bad it was. Not to mention, Anakin himself comes off as a bit of a creep towards Padme.
She covered the cameras. I don't think she liked me watching her. I'd much rather dream about Padme. Just being around her again is intoxicating. I've thought about her every day since we've parted. You're exactly the way I remember you in my dreams.
Please don't look at me like that.
Why not?
It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Sorry, milady.
Feel like the dialogue can't get any worse? Because here's the worst of it, in my opinion.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth.
I don't want to talk about this film anymore. There's only so much I can rant about with this film without sounding like I'm repeating myself. Attack of the Clones really doesn't have anything besides the Count Dooku lightsaber fight at the end worth watching or getting invested in. Notice how I didn't even mention the clone army? The same ones in the title of the film that are cloned from Jango Fett, who is revealed to be the bounty hunter? That's because they're shown partway through Obi-Wan's search for Jango Fett, and only appear at the end of the film where the only things they attack are lifeless battle droids. So, seeing as droids are not sentient, the clones never actually attack anyone. So why would you call this film Attack of the Clones? Nor did I mention when Anakin has a nightmare about his mum dying, goes to find her, she dies, he gets angry, but it never gets expanded throughout the rest of the film. Oh, also, who does Padme leave to take her place as senator while she's away? Jar Jar Binks. Let that speak for itself, though admittedly they gave him considerably less screen time in this film than in the last one, which is something they continue to improve with to a point where in the next film he doesn't even get one line. Either way, I'm done with this. If you like this film, more power to you, but I can't enjoy this film for what it is. Well, there's only one prequel left to talk about, and you all know what it is. Let's hopefully end this on a high note with what is considered to be the best of the prequel trilogy, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
Get help, you're no match for him. He's a Sith Lord.
Chancellor Palpatine, Sith Lords are our speciality.
Your swords, please. We don't want to make a mess of things in front of the Chancellor.
You won't get away this time, Dooku.
I've been looking forward to this.
My powers have doubled since the last time we met, Count.
Good. Twice the pride, double the fall.
The Clone Wars have raged on for 3 years, and the cyborg leader of the droid army, General Grievous, has kidnapped Chancellor Palpatine, who was given emergency powers by Jar Jar in the last film for the Clone Wars. So this basically means we can blame the entire Clone Wars and the eventual rise of the Empire on Jar Jar. Kind of less impactful when you think of it like that. Anakin and Obi-Wan board the ship he is being held prison on and are able to rescue him, with Anakin killing Dooku in the process, having been egged on to do it by Palpatine. They crash land the ship on Coruscant with General Grievous escaping, and bring the Chancellor safely back to the Republic. Anakin meets up with Padme, who, after they got married in secret at the end of the last film, reveals to Anakin that she is pregnant. This is already a problem for both of them to keep it a secret from the Republic, but Anakin then starts to have nightmares about losing Padme during childbirth. All the while, he is tasked with spying on Palpatine, who the Jedi are suspicious about, seeing as they learned from Dooku in the last film that the Senate is under control of a Sith Lord, and Obi-Wan is sent to hunt down and either capture or destroy General Grievous, which will end the war, unaware that back on Coruscant, Palpatine is beginning to tempt Anakin to the dark side when he discusses a way to use the Force to save people from dying. Already a +1 to Revenge of the Sith for not needing a video to help me understand the plot. Everything is clearly established and not dulled down by politics or taxations. On top of that, the film already becomes more engaging than those films right off the bat by giving us the best opening out of the entire trilogy. And I don't mean ironically or by default, I mean it's genuinely a great opening. We've got Anakin and Obi-Wan flying through a big battle in space, looking out for each other but still sharing brotherly banter. We've got them taking down the droids as they invade the ships. We've got a lightsaber duel only a few minutes into the film with Anakin and Obi-Wan fighting Dooku. We've got Anakin tapping into the dark side for the first time when he kills Dooku. We've got the reveal of the fiendish General Grievous and the intensity of our heroes trying to land half a broken ship on Coruscant. Granted, because a lot of it's CGI, most of it still doesn't look like it's really there, but in this instance we don't care because the characters are likeable, we can follow what's going on, and it even manages to bring in some of the comedy of the original trilogy.
We lost something.
Not to worry, we are still flying half a ship.
There's still political stuff to sit through though, and it's about as interesting as the last two films, but nowhere near as present here. Revenge of the Sith mostly knows what I'm watching a Star Wars film for, and delivers almost all of what I come to expect from it. However, this film's opening is so strong it is also a weakness of the previous two films. Anakin is established as a powerful Jedi but is slowly being tempted to the dark side. Obi-Wan is his wise master who shares a brotherly bond with him. Palpatine is established, the clones are established, Padme is established. The Senate and the Jedi Council don't need much establishment as all they do is sit around. It does so well at getting us to grips with what kind of characters we are watching before the big event later, but I feel as though I don't have to have watched the previous films to understand either them or the story taking place, making 2/3 of the entire trilogy, at least from my retrospective, entirely worthless. It's a weakness to Episode 1 and Episode 2 and thus the whole point of a trilogy in the first place. Another one of my favourite scenes is the Opera House scene with Anakin and Palpatine when they discuss Anakin's doubts with the ways of the Jedi. Palpatine goes on to tell him a Sith legend of Darth Plagueis, who possessed a power to save people from death, something that, as we know, is intriguing Anakin's interest from his nightmares of Padme dying. What's great about this is it's implied Palpatine was an apprentice of Plagueis, who taught Palpatine everything he knew before being killed in his sleep by him, but it's never outright said. Palpatine doesn't just say he has this special power, but only implies that it exists to Anakin.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
Had this kind of storytelling been used throughout the whole film, I would call this on par with the original trilogy, but unfortunately it doesn't. While it picks up slightly towards the end of the film, the middle section of this film is where things really drag out. We've got more council meetings, we've got more instances where Anakin and Padme talk with terrible lovey-dovey dialogue, and many instances where nothing looks like it's really there. Stuff that I've already gone on and on about in the last films, so I won't waste time on it. Also seeing as the production team know in other instances where to include actually hand-built sets. What I will instead talk about is what the prequels have built up to since the beginning, Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader. Now the scene when Anakin turns to the dark side and agrees to serve under the Emperor, I found to be okay. We know the reasons why, it's because he wants to save his secret wife, but even with that knowledge, to me his eventual turn to evil felt a bit quick. He discovers Palpatine is the Emperor, which, shock horror, we already know, but that isn't the point. Anakin tells Mace Windu about his discovery and is asked by Windu to stay at the council as he and some other Jedi Masters go to arrest Palpatine, which he doesn't listen to and arrives at the scene just as Windu has cornered Palpatine on the floor. What happened to the other Jedi Masters? Taken out at the start of the fight. Hopefully becoming more powerful than you could possibly imagine as ghosts gives them the knowledge to step out of the way of a lightsaber. Anyway, Mace Windu is about to take Palpatine to stand trial, but then Palpatine unleashes Force Lightning as a last resort of attack. This should properly clarify not just to Windu that he is a Sith Lord, as if the red lightsaber wasn't already a giveaway, but should without a doubt clarify this to Anakin, who literally got hit by Dooku's Force Lightning in Attack of the Clones when it had been confirmed he had become a Sith. Even with all that knowledge, he should still know a Sith when he sees one, and should know when he is being tempted to the dark side. So should know that Mace Windu is justified in trying to kill him at that moment. I mean, I don't remember Obi-Wan being conflicted about slicing Darth Maul in half. Even if he wants to follow the Jedi way, unlike what he did at the start of the film with Dooku. Mate, Dooku was a Sith Lord who has been commanding an army of droids in an all-out war for 3 years, and even in your fight with him, nearly killed your master by crushing him with a giant metal platform. I'll never understand the Jedi Code. Now I think it's time we talk about the ending portion of this film following Anakin's betrayal, which is where the film starts to get better. Starting with what many fans remember as the emotional highlight of not just the film but the whole trilogy. Having killed Mace Windu and having Anakin under his command, the Emperor sends a transmission to Commander Cody of the Clone Army and gives one simple command.
Commander Cody, the time has come. Execute Order 66.
Yes, my lord.
The clones in the midst of the battle turn their weapons from the droid army to their Jedi allies. One by one, they are caught off guard and are mercilessly overpowered and wiped out without so much as a second thought. Save only Obi-Wan, who is assumed to be dead, having been blasted off a mountain into a lake, and Yoda, who despite sensing the huge loss of Jedi across the galaxy, doesn't let his guard down and takes out his executioners before escaping the planet of the Wookiees. Oh yeah, Chewbacca is there. That was a thing. Now this is definitely a sad scene to watch unfold, and gets even more messed up when you see Anakin about to kill younglings in the Jedi Temple.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
It's a tragedy seeing mighty Jedi warriors fall, and the music really helps to carry the emotion. But what stops me from getting sad at this scene are two things. Firstly, the Jedi are taken out almost instantly. Given the fact that they are ancient warriors that rely on instinct in combat and can kind of see the future, kind of not, it was never really established. I feel like if they had to be taken out, they could have at least lasted longer than 10 seconds. It's a shock to see your allies suddenly turn against you, I understand that, but it's not like your Jedi reflexes go anywhere. Secondly, we're seeing the deaths of Jedi Masters that were never given time to know as people. Jedi are not supposed to let their emotions control them, but emotions are important to see to make characters relatable. Obi-Wan and Luke in the original trilogy are great examples of this. So in short, I don't remember their names, as I never really knew them as people, so instead of feeling sad over their deaths, I think, oh no, not that guy. But of course, I can't talk about Order 66 without talking about the other highlight from this film. Clocking in as the longest lightsaber fight in Star Wars history and the most emotional, Anakin Skywalker versus Obi-Wan Kenobi. It starts off with Anakin going to the lava-coated planet of Mustafar to kill Nute Gunray and the Separatists as commanded by the Emperor. Once he does, Padme, having done nothing throughout the film besides wander around barefoot and pregnant, shows up on her ship having heard from Obi-Wan that Anakin has turned to the dark side, which he discovered after he and Yoda took back the Jedi Temple and saw a hologram of Anakin killing younglings. Obi-Wan appears having snuck aboard the ship, and Anakin thinks she brought him to kill him, as, drunk on his power, he believes the Jedi to be evil. The two Jedis have their clashing speech, ignite their lightsabers, and begin their fight. The sheer impact of this climactic conflict that comes from the dark red backdrop of the red-hot planet, the grand music and the sheer speed of their choreography should not go underappreciated. It's impactful enough that this is a fight between master and apprentice with a brotherly bond, but with how long the fight plays out, makes the fight feel like it lived up to what we were told years ago in the first Star Wars film when Obi-Wan first told us of Darth Vader. In fact, it's not just this fight we're drawn into, there's a fight taking place alongside it with Yoda versus the Emperor, which is also very intense, if a little bit ridiculous to see such old warriors flip around with their lightsabers. The fight finally comes to an end with Obi-Wan taking the high ground and slicing off Anakin's legs and remaining arm when he tries to jump over him. Oh yeah, Anakin had his other arm cut off by Dooku in the last film. They do about as much with that as they did with Luke's. Anakin is left behind to burn at the side of a river of lava by both a physically and mentally exhausted Obi-Wan, who helps take the unconscious Padme to a hidden hospital on an asteroid. Padme gives birth to two twins, a brother and a sister who she names Luke and Leia, while at the same time, Anakin is rescued by the Emperor, who takes him to Coruscant for his burnt but barely alive body to be encased inside a black suit that we know as the complete Darth Vader. But I only have one last problem to discuss with this film, and it's not with Vader's construction, that's a great enough scene on its own, it's with when Padme gives birth. So we can only assume that Padme is going to die at childbirth as seen in Anakin's vision, also because she isn't in the later films. But how does she die? She's sad. Anakin got all his limbs sliced off and was burnt alive near raging hot lava and was still alive, while Padme was sad. Furthermore, the birth itself raises a bunch of questions, like how does Leia remember what her mother looked like when she was only a baby and yet Luke doesn't?
She was very beautiful.
How does Obi-Wan forget about Leia?
That boy is our last hope.
No. There is another.
On top of that, how does he forget R2-D2, who has been with him and Anakin and saved their lives multiple times?
Well then, the droid does belong to you. Don't seem to remember ever owning a droid.
And why do they send Leia to a royal family on Alderaan, but send Luke to Anakin's brother-in-law on a desolate desert? If I found out my sister got to grow up in a castle with a beautiful scenery and easily accessible water while I was stuck on a big ball of sand, I'd be very annoyed. But either way, that was Revenge of the Sith. It's a film that starts off promising, but then goes completely all over the place in its quality. It's probably the one film out of the whole prequel trilogy that feels the closest to a Star Wars film to me, doing enough good to be considered the best out of the trilogy, but falls too flat in other areas to be considered on par with the original trilogy, at least for me. So to conclude, Revenge of the Sith is my favourite, The Phantom Menace is my second favourite, again in massive quotes, and right at the bottom is Attack of the Clones. Before I end this completely, I want to answer a question that a lot of Star Wars fans will probably be asking me. Luke, why don't you watch the Clone Wars animated series? I'm not ignorant to the idea of watching the Clone Wars. I've been impressed having seen a few clips of it, and I hear it fixes a lot of the problems of the films by having a more entertaining story, more likeable characters, and makes the ending even more impactful. But even if I had watched it, there is one question I want to ask you all. If I'm supposed to watch the Clone Wars to make the films more engaging, why didn't they make the films that engaging in the first place? What I've heard about shows like the Clone Wars, and perhaps most recently The Mandalorian, it proves they can expand upon the universe in ways that the films sometimes don't have enough time to develop. My argument is that those films should have enough of a solid foundation to be entertaining on their own. The original trilogy wasn't entertaining because you had to watch something else first. There's a large number of comics, novels and video games that expand on the universe that came out after their release, which are still being made to this day, but they're not the foundation of what makes them good films. They're good films because they tell good stories that the audience want to keep watching because they enjoy the characters, the plot, the emotion, the universe, the writing, the look, the sound, all of that. The prequels, more so with Episode 1 and Episode 2, don't do that on their own, and as a result, fall flat. If you get enjoyment out of these films, that's great. Maybe you see something I don't, or you're really into politics, I don't know, I'm certainly not. Just don't let too many memes blind your vision on something being better than it actually is. Because as funny and creative as those memes can get around the prequels, a funny joke should never hide you from reality. This has probably been one of the most exhaustive episodes I've made for this podcast. I mean, oh well, at least I was partially able to enjoy one of these three films, and parts of the other two. Saying that though, it's got me curious. Picking out all the problems I've had with these films has got me thinking about what could have been done, and I imagine a question that could be coming from listeners is, well, if you don't like them so much, do you reckon you could do it better? And you know what? That is a very good question, which is what I want to ask you. After I've discussed the sequel trilogy next week, I'll be moving on to other films, because talking entirely about Star Wars every week would not only get repetitive, but also feel very forced. But what... What am I like with my jokes? But what I would like to ask you is this. For a future episode of this podcast, would you like me to dedicate a special episode where I go over how I would have written the prequels? To have your say on whether or not I actually do this, you can follow me on my radio show Instagram, Escaping Through the Lens Inst, because I could only fit the first 4 letters of Instagram onto the username, where you can have your vote at the poll in the social media story. Don't let my joke reimagining of that one scene from Attack of the Clones with my terrible impressions put you off. I'd like to think I can do much better than that. Just a reminder, this will not be made right after the sequel trilogy video. The rest of the films afterwards will be non-Star Wars related. But again, it's all down to you guys if you want to hear my take on it one day in future. And with all that said and done, this has been Luke Carruthers recording for Escaping Through the Lens on Utter Radio, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.